TorahCafe.com.
Oftentimes, an obstacle to people's faith is that very emotionally grabbing question of why do bad things happen to good people? How can an omnipotent God allow injustice in the world? So tonight we're going to try and address just that question. Now this is a question that doesn't exist in a vacuum, meaning that it's interwoven with many other foundational topics in Judaism. It touches the core of belief in God itself, the idea of free will. But we're going to try and zero in specifically on this question, just touching on some of its other topics that it touches on. This is a question that is not new, and it's known as one of the heaviest questions in all of religion. The Sefer HaIkrim says that some of the greatest prophets of the Jewish people, names like King David and Solomon, Jeremiah, Malachi, Habakkuk, all had this question. The book of Job, Iyov, is all about suffering and the struggle that a person faces when undergoing suffering in this world. The first thing that we have to do when we ask this question, why God, why does bad things happen to good people, is we have to separate in our minds the difference from where the question can come from. We have to remember that each of us has an intellect and has emotions. And sometimes a question can come from the intellect, and sometimes a question is triggered by the emotions. Now, emotions and intellect are both good and both appropriate and both useful. But they're two completely different faculties in the human being. It's like two different tools that we have, each one geared for a specific purpose. For example, take a toolbox. In a toolbox you have a wrench and you have a hammer. So a hammer does its job really, really well. But if you try and fasten a bolt with a hammer, you're not going to get very far. And a wrench does its job really well. But if you try and hammer in a nail with a wrench, you're not going to get very far. So each job, each tool does what it's meant to do very well, but if you extend it, or if you try and do something else with it, you fail miserably. In our life, a person who's looking for emotional comfort, all the intellectual reasonings in the world aren't going to help. You can't intellectualize a feeling. If someone's looking for support in their grief, explaining even the best explanation in the world is not going to do anything. And it works the other way also. If someone's looking for an answer and you just give them a hug, it's not going to satisfy them. So emotions have to be met with emotional support, a hug, and intellectual questions have to be matched with intellectual answers, with answers. Our sages tell us don't comfort someone when their dead lies before them. Why? Because the person is so emotionally involved at that minute, no matter what you're going to say, is not going to penetrate the person. This is one of the reasons, by the way, that we're not supposed to argue with missionaries. It's not that we don't have answers to their questions or to their comments, but it's just that their focus, their gear is emotionally driven. And even if you make all the sense in the world, they'll say, I hear what you're saying, I get it, it makes 100% sense to me, but I still feel it right here. So no matter what, at the end of the day, we're wasting our time. Emotions are meant to galvanize us to do what the intellect steers us. Our emotions give the power to complete, to carry out what the intellect tells us. I heard a great analogy when I was in New York by a great rabbi who said that the emotions are kind of like the gas pedal in the car, and the intellect is like the steering wheel. If you put down the gas pedal but don't maneuver the steering wheel, you're just going to end up hitting a wall, crashing. And if you're steering very well but you don't have any drive, you're going nowhere. So they have to work in tandem together. Intellect and emotions, they work together, they're part of one system. But one without the other, or one trying to do the job of the other, is not going to work. Sometimes, in fact, what our emotions tell us, we have to do the exact opposite. For example, take the idea of when you live up north. When you live up north and you're driving in the snow. I remember living up in New Jersey and being raised in Florida, never was experienced in driving in the snow. So when you're driving in the snow and you hit an ice patch, what do your emotions tell you to do? Hit the brake. What happens if you hit the brake? You're dead, right? Very dangerous. So that emotional, that gut reaction of brake has to be countered by the intellect. You have to tell us, no, don't go with that. Same thing happens, when your house is on fire, your clothing's on fire. What do your emotions tell you to do when your clothes are on fire? Scream, yell, run, get out of there. What are you supposed to do? Stop, drop, and roll. It was funny. This past Motzi Shabbos, this past Saturday night, I gave this lecture at a large women's event. And it was it was a very nice dinner celebrating the 200th passing of the Alter Rebbe. And it was a nice dinner with candlelit tables and everything like that. And after we had the discussion, a napkin hit one of the candles, and there was a fire on the table. And everyone, what was the first thing everyone did? Ah! So, pick it up, stop, drop, and roll. Okay, finished. If you're being chased by a bear, same thing. What do your emotions tell you to do? Run away. What are you supposed to do? Play dead. If you scratch a mosquito bite, right? You have a mosquito bite, it itches so much. What do your emotions tell you to do? Scratch it. What happens if you scratch it? It just makes it worse. Makes it itch more. So sometimes when our emotions tell us or are trying to lead us somewhere, or they're the ones provoking a question, we have to say, wait a second. Let's get the intellect involved and see if it lines up. So tonight we're not going to answer the pain, the grief, or the sorrow. Those are emotions. What we hope to address is how to best cope with the unspeakable pain and tragedy when it comes our way. I'd like to invite everybody here tonight on a philosophical journey. We're going to have some thoughts to ponder in the back burner of our minds. So when these situations come up in our own life, or we see them in the world, we can best know how to deal with them. Before we get into the philosophy behind it, we have to take a step back. And let's ask ourselves a question. And the answer to this question has to be made with cold, hard, unemotional honesty. Okay? The question is like this. How many evil people in the world have we really seen, and how many of them have been enjoying life? And the opposite. How many truly good or righteous people have we seen that are truly suffering? And the reason I ask that is as follows. What does good and evil really mean? Any historian or psychologist can attest that many people in our history, in world history, have been considered very good, and we're really far from it. Hitler and Stalin, considered by their followers to be heroic saviors. They were looked upon by Europe at the time as quasi-messianic figures. People who are going to redeem the country, redeem the continent, redeem the world out of the tough straits of oppression. We know that that's not the case, but hundreds of millions of people believe that. On the other end of the spectrum, the English monarchy considered Washington and Jefferson as outlaws, right? We look at them as great people, as our founding fathers, people we're proud of. The English monarchy thought of them as outlaws, people who were stealing land, inciting rebellion against the British colonists. So, were they good or were they not? Who's good and who's not? Now, I know these are extreme examples, but it shows that the moral stature, our judgment of moral stature, can be misunderstood. How intimately do we know other people and the motivations behind why they're doing something? Someone appears to be a good person, a righteous individual. We don't know what's behind them. In fact, we see many times in our society, we look to somebody, we look up to somebody, and then they turn out to be a flop. On the other hand, Hasidic tales are famous for a person looks like a drunkard or a corrupt person or a miser, and then throughout the course of events in the story, the person turns out to be a very hidden, righteous individual. So we never know. We can never really say, from our subjective view, who's really good and who's really evil. Furthermore, reward and punishment, good things and bad things happening to people. What's to say what's a good thing, or what's to say what's a bad thing? Reward and punishment are very subjective. Someone might think, wow, that person, they really have the life. They get to travel all around the world for work. Whereas that person might say to themselves, I'd really much rather be with my family and have a grounded job. Well, I don't have to get up every 2 minutes. Take a look at the lives of celebrities. Many people really would love to have their life, right? I would love the fame. I'd love the glamour, the popularity, whatever it is. Think about how they live their life, though. Despite the glamorous parties, many of them are constantly depressed. Despite the beautiful homes, many have no personal lives. And despite their abundance of fans, oftentimes they face serious loneliness. These woes frequently lead them to having no family life, drug abuse, and spending hundreds of millions of dollars in therapy. Hardly the coveted life. Another thing that we have to ask ourselves and file in the filing cabinet of our mind is, are we bothered by bad things, that bad things happen, or that they happen to good people? We all believe in justice, right? Torah stresses reward and punishment. So something's only considered bad because the person doesn't deserve it. If a person deserves it, that's not bad anymore. What is it? It's justice. So good and bad, both in describing the person and in describing the situation that they're experiencing, are subjective. In order for us to really ask the question properly, we would have to be able to see the person as an absolute. And we'd also have to see their situation in the absolute way of seeing things. Unfortunately, as human beings, it's impossible for us to see things in an absolute sense. Our view is limited to our subjective view, our limited scope. It's very logical that there are some things, when worshiping a God who is omnipotent, omnipresent, that there should be things that He knows and He understands and He operates that we can't relate to because we're not God. The prophet Isaiah says, "My thoughts are not your thoughts, nor are my ways your ways," says Hashem. Rabbi Yonai, in the Ethics of Our Fathers, Pirkei Avos, teaches it's not within our power to explain either the tranquility of the wicked or the suffering of the righteous. The Mishnah doesn't even attempt to give an answer because any answer is not going to give due justice to the idea. The Meiri comments on this Mishnah and says some things are meant to be left in a state of impossibility, that some things that can't be grasped by the human mind. Rabbeinu Yoina adds that there is a reason. There is a reason why everything is happening. It's just something that's beyond our grasp. Moses, Moshe, the greatest prophet of all time, who ever was and ever will be. After he gained atonement for the Jewish people, pleading on their behalf to God for them worshiping the golden calf, saw that there was an opportune moment and asked God, show me your glory. I want to see your face. I want to know the inner dimension of how the universe works. Please. The Talmud, the Gemara in Brachos says, what was Moses asking? Why do bad things happen to good people? Show me the absolute. Show me the full picture. Show me the front view. Show me your face. What was God's answer? No person can see my face and live. A human being, while a human being, cannot see the face, can't see the front view. What does God say? Instead, He shows him His back, shows him behind, the behind picture. Think about you ever see those artwork, the needlepoint work? There's like it's like a little screen, and then there's a whole beautiful needlepoint work. The back of the needlepoint work looks like an unattractive mass of random crisscrossing strings. No logic, no nothing to it. Knotted and chaotic. Flip it over, beautiful. A beautiful work of art. So from our view, as human beings, as limited beings, and only privy at this point in time to seeing the back, all the events look like random crisscrossing, a problem. Knots everywhere, problem, suffering, challenges. But when we're going to be able to see the front view, were we able to see the front view, we would see a beautiful masterpiece. The Ramchal, Rabbi Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, explains in his Das Tevunos that one of our rewards, one of the things that we have to look forward to in the world to come, is an explanation, a meaning for all of the sufferings that we have endured our entire life and that the world has endured through its history. So we have a very limited perspective. And sometimes what appears as suffering and hardship and challenge in our world, from our perspective, is in reality good and merciful. The Talmud, the Gemara in Sanhedrin, says that Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi used to have frequent meetings with Eliyahu HaNavi, with Elijah the prophet. They would meet frequently to talk, learn. So Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, on one of their encounters, asked Elijah, God gives you a lot of tasks. He sends you on a lot of missions. We're friends. You think I can tag along with you? Show me, I'd like to see what you do. So Elijah was not into it. Said, it's not for you. Leave me be. But Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi really wanted to. And Elijah said, you're not going to understand what's going on. You're not going to understand. It's not for you. So he begged him, please, and said, okay, I promise I won't say anything. Okay, fine. Elijah said, as soon as you ask something though, as soon as you're going to question what I'm doing, that's it. The trip is over. You're going back home, and that's it. So they said, fine. So they go on one of their journeys, and the sun it's getting late. The sun is setting, and they're looking for lodging. And they find a very poor shack with very poor people living in it. A one-room, little tiny shack. husband and wife, older couple, 2 cots in the house, and they survive on milk from a little thin cow that they have in their yard. But the people are very gracious, and they welcome Eliyahu and Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi into the house, give them their own beds to sleep in. They slept on the floor, and really treat them the way that a guest should be treated. So the morning comes, and as they're about to leave, Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi notices Elijah praying. And he's listening to what Elijah's praying for. And Elijah, is asking God to kill their cow. Their thin little cow. The only thing that they have to support themselves. And they were so nice to you. So Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi is thinking in his head, what's he doing? What's going on over here? They're so nice to you, they treat you as a guest, and this is what you're asking for? This is what's going through his mind. But he remembered his deal. I'm not going to say anything. So, next day comes, they do what they got to do. Sun's going down, got to find some lodging. Now, tonight they find a home very much the opposite of what they found. They have a beautiful home with a very wealthy, although miserly person who lives in it. A mansion. And not only is it a mansion, but there's a whole wing being extended to this mansion. And so the person invites them in, but doesn't talk to them, doesn't want anything to do with them, gives them a scrappy place to sleep, barely any food to eat, whatever. So the morning comes, Elijah's praying again. So Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi listens in. What's Elijah praying for? He said, please God, send angels to speed up the building process of this mansion. And so Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi couldn't take it anymore. He's pulling his hair out of his head. How could you, when the people are so nice to you and they're poor and they have no means, you pray that the only thing that they have, the cow, their thin little cow, all they have in the world, should die? And this guy who treated us like garbage, who's got all the money in the world and building extensions on his mansion, it wasn't even nice, you're asking that God should send angels and make the house be built faster? What's going on? I have to know. So Elijah said, well, we're gonna end right here. He says, I gotta know. Tell me. So Eliyahu said that with that first poor family, it was the decree on high that the old woman, that her time was up. It was her time to pass. I was praying to God, please take the cow instead. Let her live a little while longer. Take the cow. The second night, with this wealthy individual who didn't have time for us, pretended like he didn't know us, in the place where they're building this new wing for his mansion, there was a treasure buried. Now, if the workers would work at a normal pace and dig and do all the proper format that you do when you're building a building, so they would hit this treasure. It's his land. It would go to him, and he would be even more rich and even more arrogant. So I asked God, please send angels to speed up the building process. That way he shouldn't get this treasure. So sometimes what appears to be harshness is in reality compassion and goodness. There's more examples of how this works. The greatest example is a famous example brought down by the Nachlas Yaakov, who talks about the idea of a surgery. Imagine someone who never saw a surgery before. All these masked individuals standing around this poor person who's knocked out. Then they start taking their knives and poking them and cutting them. Imagine the person who never saw a surgery before. They'd start screaming for help. From their perspective, there's a knife, and there really is a knife being stuck into this person. It looks like a terrible event. But we know, because we've seen a surgery before, we know what's going on. And it's really an act of mercy. Think about the first time you took your child to the dentist. 4 or 5 years old, got his first cavity. Okay? So the dentist got to operate, so starts drilling up his drill. Woo! That lovely sound, right? And then he starts scraping away at the teeth, and the kid is crying, and then he puts that spit sucker upper thing in your mouth, and you're like, you can't feel any worse. Then he starts with the drill. And then mommy or daddy, who until this point is his entire world, the person that he looks to with utmost trust, not only is he not helping, not only is mommy or daddy not helping, but he's helping the dentist hold him down. True or not true? So from the child's perspective, this is the worst thing in the world. We know the reality, though, that this process is actually helping, actually aiding, actually healing the child. So from the child's standpoint, it's painful and terrible experience, but in reality, from the parent's perspective, it's helpful and healing. They can both exist at the same time. There's a famous story. It's known that the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of the Hasidic movement, whenever there was a decree on high, whenever he foresaw by his divine intuition that there was going to be certain troubles in the Jewish community, he would pray and plead and beseech God that it should be annulled and that the community should be saved. Saved the hardship, spared the toughness. That same trend was practiced by his head disciple, the Maggid of Mezrich. Whenever there was a decree, a bad decree on high foreseen that's going to happen to the Jewish community, the Maggid pray on behalf of the Jewish community to annul the decree. God, please save them. Don't let them suffer this. So after the Maggid passed away, the Maggid had many disciples. One of them was the Alter Rebbe, and other very famous Rebbes in their own right. Big tzaddikim, holy, pure people. One of those people was named the Noam Elimelech. And one time, the Noam Elimelech had a dream of the Maggid, his teacher, who had since passed. And there was a decree that was going on currently in the Jewish people at that time. And so he was so happy to see the Maggid in his dream. And he asks the Maggid, Rebbe, are you, even though you passed, are you from heaven now, still praying on behalf of the Jewish community? Are you still beseeching God to annul the decrees, the hardships when they come up? And what do you think the Maggid answered? No. So Reb Noam Elimelech, he said, your whole life you did. How come you stopped? And now you think even more. You would have a better connection now. You could do more for us. You could help us more. Why would you stop? So he says, because from our view now, from my view now, it appears as an act of mercy. I see the real picture. I see how it's beneficial. So Reb Elimelech said, well, if you see that it's beneficial, if you see that it's a good thing, does that mean that we should stop praying and pleading? We should stop becoming better? We should stop trying to get God to annul the decree? So the Maggid responded to him, no. You have to deal with the world the way that you see it. You have to deal with the perspective that you're given. You have to work out and live by and grow from the limited perspective that you have. But just know that even though it appears as tough and it appears as hard and it appears as suffering, it's really an act of kindness, an act of mercy. Part of the idea of bad things and good people is connected with the idea of free will. The existence of evil is a price that's paid for having human free will. God created a world, say the sages, in order to bestow the greatest possible good. He wanted to bestow good on His creations, the greatest possible good, bestow Himself on His creations. But not only did He want to bestow the greatest possible good, but also to bestow it in the greatest possible way, that the creature should earn it. Because when a person earns reward, it brings that much more pleasure than it would if it would be unearned. The philosophers, the Kabbalists, the mystics refer to that as shameful bread, when a person gets something that they didn't earn. So God not only wanted to give us the best bounty and blessings, but to do it in the best way, that we should earn it. In order to earn it, He created this thing called free will. The reason that God allows evil to exist in the world, and the ability for people to choose to do evil, is that a person should have the opportunity to do the wrong thing, have the temptation, choose against it, choose to do the right thing, thereby deserving God's bounty. Most of the suffering that happens in the world stems from misused human free will. Even things that don't seem like the outcome of misused free will, things like external suffering, natural disasters, acts of God, even those things are oftentimes very intertwined with misused free will. For example, hunger. Hunger is a very big problem in many places in the world, unfortunately. Yet, is that an external thing? Meaning, is that a problem, a suffering that's caused by the outside, not from human free will? Well, a lot of it is from our misused free will. Many of the reasons that people don't get the food that they need is because of political strife or legal repercussions. Take a restaurant, doesn't want to, instead of giving their leftovers at the end of the day to the homeless, are forced to throw it in the garbage, throw it in the dumpster. We waste millions and millions of dollars in food every single day. Because what would we have to look at the restaurant owners also in a logical standpoint as well. I mean, if someone gets sick, homeless person gets sick, they sue the restaurant, that's the end of the restaurant. So I mean, we can't be judgmental of them, but yet the idea of hunger and the idea of suffering in the world is not because we don't produce enough food. It's not because there's not enough food available, but it's misused human free will, political strife, or legal repercussions that prevent food from getting to all the places that it needs to get to. Even floods. Think about floods. Frequently people cut down forests that buffer rainfalls. They pave grasslands that allow rain to soak into the soil. And they build their homes right in the middle of gullies and natural drainage channels. We damage riverbanks, altering natural waterways, and we create poor drainage patterns in urban areas that can lead and cause flooding that wouldn't have been there otherwise. Not all flooding that exists, I'm not saying, is controllable. You know, we had 2011. Many places in Australia suffered from major flooding, and it was in areas that there was no way to foresee that such a thing would happen. Yet, after the flooding had stopped, they started rebuilding right exactly in the same place. It's just like the low-lying areas of New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina. Okay, it's extremely likely in the future that there's going to be a strong hurricane that's going to impact the same region. Okay, these are geologically unfortunate areas. They're just not a good place to have a home. Okay, again, we're not to be judgmental of anybody who lives there or whatever, but what we're saying is it's not so much a question of if it's going to happen again. It's when it's going to happen again. And instead of shaking our fists, why God, why? How could there be a God? We should maybe shake the fist at developers, housing developers, where they decided to place housing. Large forests inevitably catch fire every few decades. So if you build your house near a large forest, there is a good chance you may have to deal with forest fire. Okay? Drought is intensified through deforestation. Okay? It's a fact of nature. The same thing, we also don't cause hurricanes and tornadoes, but a lot of the bad decisions that we make can exacerbate the problems that occur from it. So, again, not to being judgmental of anybody, God forbid, or to point blame, but how much of even the natural disasters. Now, again, there are certain things that are for sure a natural disaster. It could never have been predicted, could never have been anything. Yet at the same time, it occurs. But many of even their natural disasters are caused by human free will, or exacerbated by our free will. So God's purpose in making free will is to enable people to become righteous. The concept of righteousness should exist in the world. Righteousness can only exist in a free-willed being. A lamb is not a martyr for being eaten by a lion, nor is a lion a murderer for eating the lamb. They're just going by their nature. They're acting upon it. They have no free will otherwise. A human being is different. A human being a free-willed being, is the only creature in the whole universe that can create righteousness. John Hick, he's a professor of philosophy at the University of Birmingham, explains a very interesting scenario. I have an excerpt from his book, and I'm going to read it to you. He says, imagine a world in which free will existed. You could choose to do right or wrong, yet there was no chance of any suffering. It was impossible that there should be suffering in that world. This is what the world would look like, he says. For example, no one could ever injure anybody else. The murderer's knife would turn to paper, or his bullets to thin air. The bank safe, robbed of millions of dollars, would be miraculously become filled with another $1 million. Fraud, deceit, conspiracy, treason would somehow always leave the fabric of society undamaged. Again, no one would ever be injured by accident. The mountain climber, the playing child falling from a height, would safely float unharmed to the ground. The reckless driver would never meet with any disaster. There would be no need to work, since not working could have no harm result from it. There could be no call to be concerned for others in their time of need or dangers, because in such a world, there would be no needs or dangers. To make possible this continual series of individual adjustments, nature would have to work by special providences, instead of running in according to general laws. The laws of nature would have to be extremely flexible. Sometimes gravity would operate, and sometimes not. Sometimes an object would be hard, and sometimes it would be soft. There could be no sciences, for there'd be no enduring world. There'd be no enduring world structure to investigate. In eliminating the problems and hardships of an objective environment with its own laws, life would become like a dream in which delightfully but aimlessly we could float and drift at ease. He concludes that it seems that in order to create an environment intended to make possible the idea of righteousness, it would have a lot in common with the world that we currently live in. It must operate according to general and dependable laws, must involve real dangers, difficulties, problems, obstacles, possibilities of pain, failure, sorrow, frustration, and defeat. This world, with all of its heartaches and challenges, is quite well attuned to the goal of developing righteousness in individuals. We know as Jews that a person's soul, we are each one of us eternal beings, immortal beings. We are an immortal continuum. This life that we live is merely a snapshot of our eternal soul. Our soul exists not only in this world, but it exists in the next world, the afterlife. God is always just to every individual. Oftentimes the wicked are rewarded in this world in order that they should have reward for any little good that they do and be cut off from the next world. Righteous people are punished to galvanize an individual to return to God, or to spare them some cleansing process upon entrance to the next world, so they can get right in there and experience it in the greatest possible way. There's an idea that all the challenges that we have in our life are a healing experience. They're afflictions of love, in a manner of speaking. In 2 weeks from now, the Parsha is going to give a very interesting verse. The verse says, all the diseases that I placed on Egypt, I will not place on you. This is when the Jewish people left Egypt, and they're now in the desert. All the diseases that I placed on Egypt, I will not put on you. I am God, your healer. All the diseases that I put on Egypt, I will not place on you. Meaning that there's not going to be any disease. I'm God, your healer, finishes the verse. Implying that there's going to be a disease, just I'm going to heal it. So which one is it? Right? God says, all the diseases that I placed on Egypt, I'm not going to place on you. Implying, not going to be any diseases. Not going to be any hardships. I am God, your healer. Implying, there's going to be hardships, there's going to be disease, but I'm going to heal you. So Rashi says that even if God inflicts suffering, it's as if he didn't because he's really healing. The greatest example, perhaps, would be the idea of a virus. When a person has a virus, bacteria perishes when the body temperature rises. We look at a fever as a curse. I don't think anybody ever felt good when they had a fever, or felt like they were getting a blessing when they had a fever. But through that suffering itself, the heightened temperature is eliminating bacteria from the body. So the very suffering itself is actually a healing agent. When Moses asked God, show me your glory, show me your face, show me the real picture, show me absoluteness. I want to see the full picture of the story. The Medrash says that he was shown a vision. Part of the process of bad things and good people in dealing with the eternal soul also is rooted in the secret of reincarnation as well. The image, the vision that Moses was shown was an image showing more than one life of the story. The image that he was shown, the first image goes as follows. There was a prince who was galloping along on his horse and came across a stream. He dismounted his horse in order to get some water. Took a cup, drank some water, got back on his horse, and rode away. What he didn't realize is that his purse of money, he dropped. When he was bending over to get the water, his purse of money fell down, and it wasn't there anymore. So he rides away unknown to him. In the meantime, a father and son who were slaves are walking along this riverbank, and they see this purse of money. They pick it up, they look inside, no identification marks, no nothing. Free bag of money. Lots and lots of money. So they go redeem themselves from slavery and live happily ever after. After that, in that same spot, an old man comes. He takes a drink from the river and falls asleep. Meanwhile, the prince feels his pockets. He realizes, oh, I lost my purse. So he gallops back. He says, I must have left it by the river. It must be somewhere over there. He gallops back to the river, dismounts his horse, and is looking all over for it. He doesn't see it anywhere. Then he sees the old man. And he wakes up the old man and he says, where's my purse? And the old man says, I don't know what you're talking about. What purse? My purse of money. I don't know. So he assumes the old man is lying and he stabs him, kills him. That's the vision that Moses is shown. And Moses cries out in outrage, where's the justice? Where's the justice? So then God shows them their previous lives. All the players in the story, the previous life. And the story goes as follows. A young boy and his father had spent many years amassing wealth, having a business. They didn't get wealthy, but they did good for themselves, and they were carrying their money that they had, and they were, calmly frolicking through the forest. Okay? All of a sudden, out of nowhere, this man pops out. He threatens them, give me your money. And the father doesn't want to. And the guy stabs the father, killing the father, and kills the son. Meanwhile, while all of this was happening, and a prince stood there, onlooking, and did nothing. So Hashem shared with Moshe, God told Moses that the father and son who were killed in the second story were the ones who got the money, who found the money in the first story. The old man who was killed in the first story, sitting by the riverbank, he was the man who had killed the father and son in the second story. And the prince, who in the second story didn't react, just watched as this atrocity was taking place, he suffered in the first story by losing his wealth. Hashem showed Moses how everything lines up. Jewish tradition says that most of the difficult situations in life can be viewed as part in an ongoing chain of reincarnation. Deaths of young children, stillbirths, disabilities, or disease are rooted in the secret of reincarnation. In other words, these souls are often come from such lofty sources on high that they only need a limited ability or time in this world in order to fulfill what that soul needed to complete. It's known that the Stipler and the Chazon Ish, sages in the early 20th century, would stand whenever they saw a child with disabilities, acknowledging that this soul must be a very lofty soul that doesn't need all of the capabilities that another has, because they just have a little mission, something small that's left to complete in their life. The Baal Shem Tov, the founder of the Hasidic movement, would counsel families of young children who passed, explaining to them the root of that person's particular soul, of a child's soul who had died, telling them exactly what happened and how it happened and what the spiritual measure for measure, tick for tack was all about. Where that soul came from, that it needed only this amount of time, this small amount of time to live. The Rebbe, Lubavitcher Rebbe, writes similarly to a grieving woman who is dealing with the passing of a young child in her life. That letter can be seen in the second volume of a work called Menachem Tzion, which is the Rebbe's works, the Rebbe's thoughts on tragedy, suffering, mourning. So we can't make judgment calls on God with only one piece of the puzzle. A work of art, before its completion, can look like an obtruse and unattractive mass of strokes and colors. Human history is the masterpiece of God. It's quite audacious to critique the greatest artist before the masterpiece is complete. On the one hand, in Jewish tradition, we're taught that everything is good. Tov Hashem lakol. Hashem is good to all. Kol da'avid rachmanu latav. Hashem, everything that God does is for the best. Everything's supposed to be gamzu l'toiva. Yet on the other hand, the same Talmud, same Gemara, teaches kishem shemivarchim al hatoiv, just like you bless on the good, mivarchim al hara, bless on the bad, implying that there is a difference. There is good and there is bad. But the good and bad that we're meant to bless on are as they relate to us, is the pain, is the personal level, the personal experience that we have. Grief doesn't mean, though, that something bad happens. It means that something sad happened. When the child is playing with matches and the mother takes away the matches, the child is sad, but he hasn't been treated bad. In this world we have sad, we have painful, and we have cleansing, but we don't have bad. So where do we go from here? The truth is that this topic is very apropos to the time that we're in. On the Hebrew calendar, this month is the month of Tevis. Our sages teach that the word Tevis is related to the word Toiv, good, goodness. And its name is Tevis, Toiv, goodness, despite the fact that the month of Tevis marked the beginning of the destruction of the temple. We just finished this past Shabbos reading the Parsha of Shmos. Moses is away. God shows himself to Moses for the first time in the form of a burning bush. That famous story, that famous encounter. God revealing himself in a thorn bush. Now you think to yourself, whenever we think about God, majesty, we think about a wonderful, serene, beautiful image. You ever see those inspirational posters? Triumph, integrity, all these powerful words. And it shows, a mountain range with the sunset, or the ocean, a beautiful scene. The sun shining itself through a redwood tree. Gorgeous. Sometimes they have calendars that have like one of these beautiful scenes, and it says, a verse from the Psalms or the verse from the prophets. God's glory fills the entire world, and have a beautiful picture of the sunrise. So when God's going to show himself to Moses for the first time, why does he choose the imagery of a burning bush, a thorn bush? What could be less inspiring than that? The answer is, this is the message that God is sending to his people. It's very easy to be spiritual. It's very easy to be godly. It's very easy to be Jewish when things are good, when everything looks right, when everything looks inspirational, when we're in the synagogue and we're sitting there at Yom Kippur. It's very easy to feel that spiritual feeling. When we have our family around and everything is great, it's very easy to feel connected. But God says, I'm not only with you in those instances. I don't want you to only remember me in those instances. I'm with you in the thorns of life. I'm with you in the thorn bush. I'm with you in the tough times. I'm with you in the suffering. Don't forget that. Are we allowed to question God? I think it depends where the question comes from. Like we said at the beginning, is it an emotionally charged question? Or is it a question seeking knowledge? An emotionally charged question would be, I don't believe in God because there's lots of suffering in the world. Therefore, I don't believe in you. The believer can question, but still remain loyal to his faith. Say, God, I know that you're there. God, I know that you're with me. God, I know that you're with me even in the thorns of life, even through the pain and the suffering and the hardships. And I know that everything that you do in the ultimate realm, in an absolute approach, is all good. But God, please show me the goodness in a way that I can relate to it as well. What do all the tragedies that we've heard about lately mean? What's the tick for tack? What's the measure for measure? I don't know the answer. And I think it'd be audacious and silly and rude for someone like me to even give an attempt. You have to speak to a Baal Shem Tov for that. You have to speak to a tzaddik. Speak to somebody who has this intuition, who knows the bigger picture. A much more learned scholar. A much more righteous individual. Yet I can tell you, though, what they don't mean. Can't tell you what they mean. And God should also comfort those families who have experienced the toughest hardships that a person can experience. I'll tell you what these situations don't mean, though. They definitely do not mean Be the same person you are today as you were the day before this incident happened. Treat life exactly as usual. Be the same you. Whenever we have a personal suffering or see suffering in the world, we have to use it as an opportunity to do tshuva, an opportunity to return, an opportunity to reconnect, to see how can I prevent this from happening? What extra bit of light can I add in the world that can stop this darkness from growing? May it be God's will that we all witness very soon what the Navi Yeshaya, the prophet Isaiah, said, that God will wipe away the tears from every face speedily in our days.